Hello and welcome to State of the Economy, a show that connects you with key policymakers and thinkers. Today we have with us Dr. Narendra Jadhav, a member of Planning Commission as well as a member of the National Advisory Council. He has been involved in the Planning Commission mainly in education reforms besides employment and labor, which are also his portfolios. But today we will chiefly discuss reforms in the education sector with Dr. Jadhav. Welcome to our show. Will India achieve the much touted demographic dividend that we all talk about?
First of all, let me clarify that, where we stand now in terms of our country, we are enjoying demographic dividend, as you have rightly said. The average age of India today is only 24, and the average age by the year 2020 would be only 29 years, at which point the average median age for United States would be 37, for China it would be 38, for Western Europe it would be 42, and for Japan it would be 48. So we have a tremendous advantage in terms of having a large and growing young population. This is what we call demographic dividend.
Which will be both consumer as well as producer.
Correct. It is recognized at the highest policy-making level in our country that this is an opportunity which comes once in a lifetime of a nation. And we must harness that. And if we do not harness that, if we fail to harness this demographic dividend can turn into a demographic nightmare.
So that means what you're saying that we have a 10-year window, 15-year window?
We have a 15-year window in which we are going to continue to have this demographic dividend, but this is a window of opportunity and we must harness it, failing which I think the future generations will never forgive us. And this is recognized at the highest level, and that is why it is clearly understood in the planning process where we are. As you are aware, we are just finishing the 11th five-year plan and we are currently working on the 12th five-year plan. It is recognized that unless we put our house in order as far as the education and skill development sector is concerned, there is just no way we can harness this demographic dividend, nor is it going to be possible for us to sustain the high economic growth that we have achieved in the last few years.
Dr. Jadhav, in this context, can you just give us an idea of what sort of scaling up of supply in the education sector would be required to meet this demographic dividend? In this context, just one data point which is really disappointing is that gross enrollment ratio in India is just 20%, which is half of the world average, as you just told me before we started the interview, and probably just 2/3 of the developing country average.
Let me say this, in terms of the absolute size, India has now become the second largest education sector in the world in terms of higher education. The total population, total number of students that we have is about little more than 20 million. And if you take the open and distance education, then add 4 more million, so we have little more than 24 million. It's hard to believe, but the total number of students that we have enrolled is slightly higher than that of United States, but much less than what is there in China. Now that is in terms of the absolute number. That of course relates to the population. As a ratio, as we were discussing earlier, GR, the gross enrollment ratio, today is about, if you take the age group of 18 to 22 as the age group for higher education, in that age group, the GR computed today is about 20%, which is only 1/2 of the world average, and it is also only 2/3 of the average for developing countries.
How to scale it up?
We need to increase the GR, and that's why major expansion is required. We have started major expansion in the 11th plan, and the same process is going to continue in the 12th five-year plan.
So you need more universities, more colleges,
partly,
more
that is absolutely necessary, but that's not sufficient. Just to give you some idea about what we are planning is that in the 12th plan, we want to take the total level of, the absolute level of enrollment in the traditional education from 20 million to 30 million. We want to take the GR to 30%, at which time it would be close to the GER of China. By that time, China may go even higher.
In the next 10 years, you say?
In the next 5 years, we want to take it from 20% to 30%. So there's a big challenge involved, and that would require enormous investment in the education sector.
Can we, to enable this, this measure of scale up or this kind of scale up, do you think a total funding of less than 2% of GDP for center and states is enough?
No, certainly not.
So what kind of additional funding will be required?
Let me also add, before we go to the funding aspect, let me also add a big challenge that we need to face. Not only in terms of quantity, also in terms of its regional distribution.
Okay.
As I said, the GR...
We will come to regional distribution, but can you give us an idea of...
that's part of the challenge. The financing cannot be independent of the regional distribution. That's why I want to highlight that, that if our GR, as I said, at national level is about 20%, which looks impressive enough, but not very impressive. If you break it down in terms of male, female, urban, rural, in terms of scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, minorities, denotified and nomadic tribes, the picture that emerges is appalling. There are huge strata of society where there are very large sections of society where GR is less than 3%. You take scheduled tribe women in the rural area, there the GR would be 3 to 4%. Now, which means that there are sections of society where at this point of time, we have 96 to 97% people do not even have access to higher education. Do you realize the enormity of challenge?
This is in terms of strata of society, but also in terms of states. All universities seem to be concentrated in 5 states, and many other states don't have a single university.
There is a highly skewed distribution. Today we have about 634 universities and about 34,000 plus number of colleges, which is large enough. But their distribution is not uniform, it is highly skewed. And then another distinction that comes in terms of the quality differential is, there are universities which are central universities, then there are state universities, then there are deemed universities, and then there are private universities.
We'll go in greater detail on this distribution.
All right.
But after a small break, please don't go away, keep watching Rajya Sabha television. Welcome back to State of the Economy. We are having a conversation with Dr. Narendra Jadhav, Member of Planning Commission and Member of the National Advisory Council. Dr. Jadhav, we were discussing the skewed distribution of education in the country. We were also discussing the need to scale up education in a big way. For that, financing is a key aspect.
Absolutely.
Now, please give us an idea of what kind of additional financing would be required in terms of ratio of GDP in the next 5 to 10 years when India would like to enhance or increase its enrollment ratio to 30% as you said.
Well, we are in the process of calculating that, but let me give you a perspective on that. Long ago, I think way back in 1966, there was a very important commission appointed, Kothari Commission. Kothari Commission had suggested that we should be spending on entire education, primary, secondary, higher and technical, everything together, 6% of GDP. You'll be surprised that we have been stuck at 3.5%. We started, in spite of all the lofty talk, quite frankly, until the 11th five-year plan, we have simply not been spending enough on education sector. Now, the process started in big way in the 11th five-year plan. For example, the education outlay in the 11th five-year plan was 8 times the outlay in the ninth, in the 10th five-year
And this
plan.
3% includes center and states both, right?
It includes everything, but we are at 3.5%. We are quarter to 4%. We have really a long way to go to achieve that target. There would be a huge expansion required. That process has begun. It began in the 11th five-year plan, and it will continue in the 12th five-year plan. And we need to give, in the approach paper to the 12th five-year plan, which we have put out on the website, that is approved by the National Development
So are you
Council.
still sticking to 6% or?
No. We are not talking about 6%. We are talking about giving overriding priority in the 12th five-year plan to three sectors. First is education and skill development. Second is health, and third is infrastructure. What will happen is that we want to raise the 3.5%, it's 3.75% now, quarter to 4%. We need to raise that. To raise that, we cannot in one plan go to 6%. Because we are late started. We did not increase the expenditure as a ratio of GDP. 45 years are over after the Kothari Commission gave the report. But the real expansion in education sector has started only in the 11th five-year plan, and we want to continue that process in the 12th five-year plan and possibly in the 13th five-year plan as well. So we will be inching towards attaining that 6%. But it is no gain saying that we will achieve that 6% in one plan or two plans. That's
Coming here, I would like to also ask you about quality that we are delivering with the kind of funding that we have. Recently, Pratham came up with a report especially on primary education, which said more funding has gone into primary schooling through Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan and other such schemes, but the outcomes are far less than satisfactory. Now, how do you deal with quality of outcome? Here, when I talk about quality, I would also want you to tell us something about the nature of pedagogy. Do we require a big fundamental shift in the mindset, in the way we teach, in the way we research? That's the larger question that I want to ask.
That would be in the context of the higher education.
Higher education.
Okay, let me start with primary education. For primary education and secondary education, let me say this, that there are some very strong, very positive achievements in terms of Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan. There's absolutely no doubt about it. Now, in terms of the access, how do we measure the access? We measure the access in terms of the number of children which are out of the school as a proportion of total, one. And second, as far as the primary education is concerned, what is the proportion of the habitations which are covered, what proportion of habitations have a primary school within 1 kilometer's radius, and for the secondary or for higher, for elementary education, that is up to 7th or 8th, we talk about availability of school in a radius of 3 kilometers. On both counts, we have done phenomenally well in terms of improving the access of primary education. Now I come to the second. The biggest challenge there is how to improve the quality. This is absolutely true. Pratham reports year after year have shown that quality leaves much to be desired. Not only Pratham, for the first time we participated.
But again, there are inter-states variation.
Yeah, but
like
general,
Himachal Pradesh shows good outcomes, but other states.
No. But for even the good states, when there was a testing done at international level, at a higher level than what Pratham does, it turned out that we were at the rock bottom, only better than Kyrgyzstan. It was tested at the level of 9th and 10th standard.
We were still very poor.
Extremely poor. So that gives us a very strong signal that the median quality of education, may it be primary, secondary or higher education, it leaves much to be desired, and that is going to be focused.
Decades of purely state-led funding has given us less than satisfactory results in terms of quality. Now there's this big debate about the role of private sector in primary, secondary and higher education. Now, do you think the private sector can play a big role in meeting this deficit that you just spoke about?
Sure, of course. No, in fact, private sector has been playing a role, but it will have to play much bigger role in secondary education and in the higher education. Now, there are two reasons for that. One is connected with the quality that you are talking about. I'm not for one believe that just because a private sector comes in, the quality improves. No such illusion should be there. There are government schools which are doing phenomenally well. So we need to improve the quality. But the reason why private sector should be involved in a much bigger way than present is because the total requirement of funding is very large,
in a short period of time.
very large, and no matter how much government desires, they will not be able to bring about that kind of expansion because we have to work within the overall fiscal framework. So therefore government funding must be supported by a private sector funding also, and that is why in both education as well as in skill development, PPP, public-private partnership, is being emphasized. Only last year, few months back, the investment in PPP is considered eligible for like the PPP in infrastructure. So investment in social sectors like education is now eligible for like the other investment, private investment in the sector, in the infrastructure sector. So we are moving in that direction, but not only because of quality reasons, it's also because of the paucity of funds, and we need to do so much that no government, in spite of whatever, with the best of, most noblest of their intentions, they will require to take the private sector funding to give the push that is required.
Since you concede that to meet the deficit, the gap in supply, scaling up of supply, private sector has to play a role, supplement the state. Do you think the framework for the private sector can be changed in order to let them operate as commercial entities, or should they continue to operate in the present framework of societies or Section 25?
No, I'll come to that. That's a political question, really. I'll come to that. Even in the public spending, there are very serious problems that I want you to please understand. That is that you can divide our universities into 4 different categories. And there is a sort of caste system in our education system.
There is a class system.
There is no caste system.
Caste system, I'm assuming that class and caste are overlapping.
Not here, not here. See, there are central universities which are very small in number. That is the first category. They have no fiscal constraint in the sense that they get more money than they can absorb.
Like the Jawaharlal University.
Take all the central universities. Then there is a second rung of universities which are state universities. Now you will be surprised that state universities are really the mainstay of education system, because 89% of our total student population goes to state universities. 89%, and they are the ones who are perpetually starved of funding.
Dr. Jadhav, we'll discuss this in more detail, but after a break, please don't go away and keep watching Rajya Sabha television. Welcome back to State of the Economy. We are having a conversation with Dr. Narendra Jadhav on our education system and education reforms. Dr. Jadhav, you were making this very fine point that it is the state universities which are delivering the bulk of the supply.
Right.
And they are
perpetually starved of funding.
They're disproportionately starved of funds.
Right.
And you were also speaking about other imbalances, areas where gross enrollment is less than 5% in terms of sections of society.
Right.
Now, how do you correct these imbalances? Because this process of scaling up can be done only after correcting these imbalances. There is a sequencing, and if you just scale up with the current distortions, you may end up with again a skewed education system which does not deliver in a comprehensive manner.
Yeah, in the context of public sector, what I was saying is that you don't measure public spending on education in one uniform way. Yeah. It has a different implications for different strata of the education system. Yeah. Yeah. Higher education, in the higher education system, private the central universities virtually have no budget constraint. It's the state universities which lack funding. Now, state universities, see, remember, education was once upon
the private sector should be asked to
No.
there?
I am saying that first of all, public sector funding should be redirected in a more even or more uniform manner
to the state universities.
To the state universities, and we are going to take special measures in the 12th five-year plan to make sure that state universities, remember, which cover 89% of the student population, they will get funding. What has happened basically is that education was once earlier a state subject. So state universities are supposed to be funded by the states. Then it became a subject on the concurrent list. Today what is happening is that central government is not funding them enough and state governments are not forthcoming to take care. As a result, state universities are starved, and the poor quality of education is basically because of the state universities which are starved of funding.
So this is a one big skew which needs to be corrected.
Exactly. So even in public spending, we need to be little more focused on state universities, and in addition to the state university, in addition to public spending, it should be also supplemented by the private. That is what I'm trying to say. It's a nuanced kind of approach.
Coming back to another big issue which Dr. Jadhav, you are grappling with at the policy level, is the setting up of a super regulator, the National Commission for Education Research. Now, as you said, this super regulator will really help in this big scale up in our education supply, skill supply that you spoke about over the next 10 years. Now, what are the challenges that you're facing in setting up this regulatory system? Because my sense is that there's a big resistance from the existing regulators, and there is a certain vested interest, if I may call it, on the basis of the political economy of these existing interests that is coming in the way of setting up of this super regulator, which is also expected to correct the skew that you're talking about, right? Now, how do you deal with all these vested interests in our political economy, which also includes our political class, which is heavily invested in higher education?
First of all, let me give you a perspective on the kind of reforms, the kind of legislative reforms which are currently underway, and there are many of them. What you talked about, NCHER, the National Commission on Higher Education Research, is the most important one. But that's the one, National Commission on Higher Education Research. Then there is a bill which is pending with the Parliament about creating a regulatory authority for accreditation process. Third one is tribunals, state level tribunals and the central level tribunals, which will take care of the
tribunal bill.
The fourth one is a bill for prevention of malpractices in higher education, which, as we all know, are far too many. And the fifth one is foreign education providers. These are the five major bills.
You also look at the foreign
universities coming in and setting up their shop here.
To which also there is a big resistance at the moment.
No, that's fine. There is a resistance to each one of these. Let's go over these specifically in terms of resistance. Let's first understand what they're trying to do. NCHER, National Commission on Higher Education and Research, basically it is intended to create not a super regulator of the kind that you're talking about, but today we have 15 different regulators, UGC, AICTE, NCTE, you name it, all the alphabets are covered. There is the coordination between them is very poor, synergy between them leaves much to be desired, and therefore it was conceived that there can be one big regulator which will, all these regulators can go. UGC will be dissolved, AICT will be dissolved, all other regulators will be dissolved, and the education part of that will be taken together in terms of a one super regulator of the kind that you were talking about. Then there was a change and they made two instead of one. For the medical sciences and related subjects, there is one regulator expected, and for all others, there is going to be another regulator expected. Now, what we have done is that the Prime Minister had appointed a task force. We prepared the draft, and then we took the draft all over the country and discussed with the political leaders, also with the educationists, academicians, and we kept on revising.
There was a consensus around this?
We tried to build consensus. There was a lot of resistance from various vested groups. Some of them were coming out of the political economic considerations. But one of the most important thing that will happen if NCHER comes through is that it will change the governance system of the higher education sector. In fact, I do believe that the higher education sector would be unrecognizably different than what it is now. Now there is, as you rightly said, there has been resistance, and we have made changes in that. Ultimately, it would be sorted out in the parliament when the bill comes before for discussion. But there are various issues, the political economy, vested interest that you mentioned about.
And the political class, which is invested in higher education.
Right.
I mean, they are the biggest the resistors, they're resisting foreign universities coming in.
Some states, there is a central state issue. Take the simple case of appointment of vice chancellors. We want NCHER should be giving autonomy to the universities and to the vice chancellor. The autonomy presently is limited, and that needs to be improved. Now, we made a suggestion in the NCHER bill, a suggestion was made that there should be a national registry created of all the eligible people to become vice chancellor, and individuals can nominate themselves, politicians can nominate their own people, the government, state governments can nominate, but only subject to the scrutiny of the NCHER.
So you're giving them flexibility to...
And we said that any university which wants a vice chancellor to be appointed can take 5 names from the national registry and choose one. If they don't find all 5 unsuitable, take another 5. So, however, you should imagine, you cannot imagine the amount of resistance that we faced. That is where the political economic considerations came in. That is where politicians at the state level were up against us. So
when will this be resolved? When do you think that these bills will be...
Parliamentary democracy
will become acts?
Yeah, it is there in the parliament.
Because we are also running against a very stiff deadline.
Right,
We have to scale up in the next 5-6 years.
Correct. No, we have to not only scale up, we have to reform the whole system. Having accepted parliamentary democracy as our guiding principle, it will have to be the process of, the legislative, it has to go through the legislative process.
You have to go through parliament.
That's where it would be debated, discussed. I only hope that it would be done sooner.
Realistically, how long do you think will it take for all these bills to become acts?
Nobody can predict when it will come and when it will be discussed and what shape and form it will come out. It is the collective wisdom of the parliament which will finally decide the shape. And that is how it should be. But I am hoping personally that it will be done earlier rather than later. I am also hoping that there would be more or less the same form in which it has been presented, it will come through. But your guess is as good as mine there.
Thank you, Dr. Jadhav. We'll be back with you again with another episode. Thank you. Goodbye.